My name is Eleanora Wray, and I turned 70 last winter. People say I have the kind of calm that makes them confess things. Though I've learned that calm is often mistaken for peace. It's really practice years of teaching children how to hold a brush steady, how to wait for the paint to dry before judging the color. The afternoon the letter arrived. Portland was wrapped in its usual drizzle. I had just come in from trimming the hydrangeas when I saw it lying on the entry table, an ivory envelope thick enough to mean money, thin enough to mean distance. The handwriting was unmistakable. Marin's, my daughter's. Looping and precise. I slid it open with the edge of a palette knife, of all things. Inside, a single card gleamed under the lamplight floral embossed. Expensive, perfectly impersonal. And then the note. You can watch the wedding online. Mom, that was all. No seat reserved, no address, no return number. Just a streaming link printed at the bottom in smaller type. As if even the technology knew I'd be watching from afar. I stood there, holding the card with my garden gloves still damp, for a long time. The rain outside and the ticking clock inside sounded like the same rhythm, slow, indifferent. On my desk sits a photograph of Marin at 7 years old. Paint streaked across her cheek. Her father kneeling beside her with the same grin she used to have. I remembered that day, our kitchen covered in blue fingerprints, laughter bouncing off the tiles. Tom had said, "Let her make a mess, Ellie. It's how she learns what she loves." Somewhere along the years, she stopped painting, stopped visiting, stopped asking me to correct her drafts or comment on her plans. And now, she'd found a way to make even her wedding tidy, no tears. No travel, no mother. I placed the invitation beneath the glass of my drawing table, pressing it flat. A keepsake, or evidence I wasn't sure which. Outside, the clouds began to lift over Forest Park. I turned toward the window and whispered, "She doesn't hate me. Tom, she just doesn't need me." The kettle began to whistle, and I went to pour my tea. The envelope stayed on the desk, pale and unblinking, waiting for the next silence to arrive. It has been 10 years since Tom died. A stroke. Sudden and unfair. Took him from a Saturday morning coffee into eternity before the ambulance even arrived. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway, the half-sliced orange still on the counter, thinking the color looked wrong without his laughter in the room. Marin was 28, then sharp, determined, impatient with anything that didn't move as quickly as her ambition. After the funeral, she stayed only a week. She had a job offer in Seattle, a startup promising shares and power. And she told me gently but firmly that I should sell some of Tom's paintings to give her a foundation. I couldn't. Each brushstroke was a piece of his voice, and I couldn't barter it away. Marin's disappointment was quiet but cutting. From then on, her calls grew shorter, her visits rarer. The first year, we still tried birthdays, brief holidays, polite exchanges. But gradually, she stopped asking how I was, and I stopped reminding her that she used to love black coffee and early mornings. She began calling me Mother, a word that felt colder every time it passed through the phone line. The last time we stood face to face was Thanksgiving 3 years ago. She brought Dane Hollis, her fiancé, all charm and calculation. During dinner, I reached for the wine glass too soon, and he laughed softly, saying, "Mrs. Wray, in our family, we wait for the toast." Marin didn't correct him. She just smiled that tight smile she wears when she wants the room to look perfect. After they left, the house smelled like roasted thyme and unsaid words. I washed the dishes alone, watching the window fog with steam, and told myself, the lie every parent learns to repeat. At least she's happy. Even then, I knew it wasn't true. What we had wasn't anger. It was emptiness that had learned to behave. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in Portland's soft gray mist. I woke before the alarm, the air cool enough that my breath lingered in front of me. The world outside was still no traffic, no birds, just the hum of the city under rain. It felt like a morning meant for church, though I hadn't stepped inside one in years. I made tea, steadying my hands as I stirred honey into the cup. Then I laid out the small rituals I'd decided on the night before the lace napkin from our first anniversary. A single candle, and Tom's silver frame polished until it caught the faint light from the window. I placed them on the table beside my laptop, arranging the scene like a still life quiet, balanced, unremarkable to anyone else. I dressed in my pale blue chiffon dress, the one I used to wear to gallery openings, and fastened my pearl earrings, not because anyone would see me, but because I needed to feel present, as if dressing the part could make me part of it. When I turned on the laptop, a faint reflection of Tom's photo appeared on the screen, his eyes meeting mine for a second before dissolving into the loading icon. I clicked the link Marin had sent. The page opened to a countdown and a soft instrumental loop. I adjusted the speakers and, out of habit, toggled the recording feature I once used for my art lectures. The small red dot appeared in the corner, unnoticed. When the screen shifted to a live feed, the sound of violins filled the room. A garden, bathed in pale gold sunlight, appeared. Rows of white chairs and rose petals scattered along the aisle. Everything shimmered, composed, almost too perfect to be real. I leaned closer, my hand resting on Tom's frame. "You'll walk her down the aisle, Tom," I whispered. "I'll just watch." Outside, the rain began again, light as breath against the window. Inside, the music swelled, and the picture held steady, flawless, beautiful, and somehow already uneasy. The camera shifted with a smooth sweep, revealing the shoreline of Lake Union glittering behind the glass terrace. Seattle sunlight, sharp and untrustworthy, flashed off the water, turning everything white and weightless. Then the view steadied on the bridal suite, a room too polished to feel alive. Marin sat before the mirror, veil pinned with surgical precision, her shoulders drawn tight beneath the lace. She looked breathtaking. Yes, but the kind of beauty that costs too much effort. Behind her, women moved in coordinated gestures. Makeup artist, hairdresser, a bridesmaid adjusting her robe. None of them smiled for real. To the right of the frame stood Patricia Hollis, the groom's mother, her hair a shade of blonde that didn't exist in nature. Even through the screen, her authority filled the space. She leaned toward the wedding planner, pointing at a clipboard, lips moving fast. The planner nodded, jotting notes, then flinched when Patricia's tone sharpened. I turned up the volume slightly, catching fragments, flowers, schedule, no delays. The bridesmaid closest to Marin, Leona, I recognized from a photo once posted online, checked her phone with restless urgency. The gesture didn't belong in a room meant for celebration. A waiter in a white jacket appeared behind her, discreetly slipping a small envelope into her hand before disappearing again. Leona froze, eyes flicking toward the camera as if she knew she'd been seen. I caught myself leaning closer, reading the unspoken language of the room tension disguised as etiquette, control dressed up as grace. I'd spent decades teaching students how to notice imbalance, how a canvas could look whole, yet vibrate with something just off. This was the same, a symmetry about to fracture. Marin glanced at her reflection, then down at her lap. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never had when she was pretending to be fine. "She's not happy," I whispered into the quiet room. The candle beside me flickered once, as if in agreement. On the screen, the planner signaled for everyone to line up. The music swelled again, Everything was in place, yet nothing felt steady. The screen brightened as the camera cut to the garden terrace. Rows of guests turned toward the aisle, sunlight pooling in soft gold on their polished shoes. The string quartet began its prelude, sweet and thin, and then Marin appeared hand in hand with her father's old friend, who had offered to walk her down the aisle. Her veil shimmered in the light, but her steps faltered for a moment before she reached the altar. Dane looked composed, almost rehearsed. He smiled when the pastor began to speak, but it was the smile of someone performing an emotion rather than feeling it. I could hear the faint rustle of paper as the vows were read. Dane's voice carried confidence. Marin's did not. Her tone wavered near the end, the word forever trembling on her tongue before she swallowed it whole. The camera panned briefly across the guests. Patricia's family sat rigid, polished as marble, nodding at the appropriate moments. On the opposite side, faces from my side, distant cousins. Old neighbors wore expressions that mixed confusion with forced delight. Even through the grain of the stream, I could sense the divide, two halves of a photograph that refused to merge. When the ceremony ended, applause rippled like something fragile. Marin turned toward Dane, and for a second, pride flickered in me despite everything. She was radiant, my daughter, radiant and trembling. The scene shifted to the reception hall, chandeliers catching the late afternoon light. The same waiter from the suite appeared near the DJ booth, leaning in close. The DJ nodded, confusion etched on his face. At the edge of the frame, Leona noticed and went pale, her bouquet dropping slightly. Through my speakers came a faint murmur. Someone off camera, low, urgent. "She's here." The phrase echoed, swallowed by the crowd's chatter. Marin's head turned sharply toward the entrance, eyes narrowing beneath her veil. Her bouquet quivered, petals brushing against the microphone pinned to her dress, sending a faint static hiss into the room. I clutched my mug with both hands, heart hammering, on screen. Everything still looked beautiful, but I knew beauty had started to break. The reception had settled into a rhythm of speeches and laughter, the kind that feels rehearsed. Crystal glasses clinked. Waiters glided between tables like quiet machinery. The camera moved across the room until it found Patricia Hollis, standing near the stage, holding a microphone with the confidence of someone used to controlling attention. She smiled broadly, her voice clear and bright through my laptop speakers. "Before dessert, we have a special surprise for the happy couple." The crowd responded with polite applause. Marin turned, startled, whispering something to Dane that the mic didn't catch. He frowned, his jaw tightening. The ballroom doors opened. A tall woman stepped through, blonde hair falling over one shoulder, the kind of red dress that looks deliberate. The camera adjusted focus as she walked closer, and the name appeared like an echo in my mind. Danielle. I remembered it from an old article, a face once linked to Dane's company. Behind her, the lights dimmed. A projector screen descended. The first image flickered. Dane and Danielle at a beach, laughing. Then another, a Christmas party, her hand on his chest. Then more birthdays, vacations. Years blurred into a collage of betrayal. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone shouted. The microphone squealed. Patricia's expression didn't falter. She stood like a hostess, unveiling a masterpiece. Marin froze. Then the slide changed again. Danielle holding a white sign. Handwriting elegant and cruel. "Congratulations, Ryan. Call me when you're ready for the real thing." A glass shattered off screen. The camera jerked. People were standing, voices overlapping shock, denial, outrage. Marin's face filled the frame, eyes wide, bouquet trembling in her hands. She turned toward Dane, mouth open, Then the image stopped. The screen froze mid-motion, petals suspended in the air. Her scream caught between pixels. The candle beside my laptop burned perfectly still. I couldn't move. In the silence, the only sound was the ticking of my kitchen clock. Each second landed like a hammer. I waited 5 minutes, maybe more, before the feed finally went black. 2 nights passed after the wedding, each one longer than the last. I hadn't turned on the television or answered a single call. The laptop still sat open on the table, its black screen reflecting the faint glow of the candle I hadn't had the heart to blow out. Outside, rain pressed softly against the windows, as if the whole city had gone quiet out of pity. It was close to midnight when the knock came. Slow, uncertain, I froze. Tea halfway to my lips. The second knock was firmer, a familiar rhythm that pulled me to my feet before thought could catch up. When I opened the door, Marin stood there. Her hair was tangled from travel. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. The coat she wore was damp at the edges, clinging to her like something she'd outgrown. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, both unsure who should speak first. I had nowhere else to go, she whispered, voice breaking on the last word. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly, as though the air itself were fragile. I moved toward the stove, reaching for the kettle, its familiar weight grounding me. The hiss of water heating filled the silence. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, steam curling between us. Marin's eyes were red and hollow, her hands shaking as she wrapped them around the mug. She didn't try to explain, and I didn't ask. Finally, she looked up. "Mom, did you record it?" The question hung there quiet, heavy. I met her eyes and nodded once. She exhaled a sound that wasn't quite relief, not quite grief. Then her shoulders sagged, the way they used to when she was a child caught between guilt and exhaustion. I reached across the table, placing my hand lightly over hers. Neither of us spoke again. The kettle clicked off behind us, and somewhere in the distance, the clock began to chime 1. The conference room smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, too clean, too cautious. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the gray Seattle skyline, and the sound of rain against glass carried faintly through the air vents. Marin sat at one end of the long table, back straight, hair pulled into a low knot. Across from her, Dane and his parents waited beside 2 lawyers, their designer umbrellas still dripping onto the carpet. I sat behind Marin, a quiet shadow. The lawyer she'd hired from Portland had already spoken once. Short and precise. "We're here to resolve this privately." Then he leaned back, letting her take the lead. Marin opened her laptop. The screen's glow reflected off the polished table. "You all remember this moment," she said evenly. Clicking play, the recording began. Patricia's voice announcing a special surprise. The woman in red stepping forward. The slideshow of photographs. I watched the color drain from Dane's face as each image appeared, ending with Danielle's cruel smile frozen mid-frame. Patricia tried to interrupt something about a misunderstanding, but her voice trembled. The other lawyer reached over, whispering sharply for her to stop. Marin pressed pause, letting silence stretch until even the rain seemed to still. "I'm not here for money," she said. "I'm here for respect." She slid a paper across the table, her written terms. "A public apology to my family. Every wedding gift donated to the women's shelter where she volunteered. And a formal reinstatement of her teaching contract at the foundation Patricia's company had withdrawn after the wedding." Patricia's husband leaned forward, his voice low. "Do it, before this spreads." The words carried more fear than decency. While their lawyers prepared the paperwork, I placed a sealed envelope beside Marin's laptop. It contained the metadata of the stream, the proof that nothing could be erased. Patricia glanced at it, eyes wide. When the last signature dried, no one spoke. We walked to the elevator in silence, the rain tapping faintly beyond the glass. As the doors closed, Marin exhaled. I looked at her reflection in the steel panel and said quietly, "Some silences do their own talking." Spring came late that year, dragging light into Portland as if the city wasn't sure it deserved it. By then, Marin had found a small craftsman cottage on the east side, tucked behind a row of blooming dogwoods. The rent was modest, the walls uneven, but she said it felt real, like a place that didn't expect her to perform. She started volunteering with an art in schools program, the same network I'd once helped build. At first, she only assisted with logistics grant proposals, schedules, but before long, she was standing in front of children holding paintbrushes, explaining color like it was something sacred. Her voice softened when she spoke about art, the same way Tom's used to when he taught her how to mix blue and ochre into something that looked like light. Our Sundays became routine again, but a gentler kind of routine. I'd make soup, usually lentil or carrot, and she'd bring bread from the bakery near her street. We didn't talk much about the wedding or the lawsuit, or the people who pretended not to have watched it online. Some silences, I'd learned, didn't need to be broken. They just needed to be lived through. The house filled with the familiar hiss of the old record player, Tom's favorite jazz records spinning like they never stopped waiting for us. Marin hummed along sometimes, almost unconsciously, while sorting through papers on the kitchen table. One afternoon, when she came by after class, she found her father's old Nikon camera on the counter. I'd had it restored, quietly new leather grip, the lens polished to clarity. She picked it up slowly, her fingers tracing the small engraved initials near the base. I set my teacup down and said, "Use it when you're ready to see, not pose for a long moment." She didn't reply. Then, as light filtered through the lace curtains, she lifted the camera and smiled, unforced, unguarded, the way she used to when the world still felt simple. It was the first real smile I'd seen in years. The rain had returned to Portland, soft and rhythmic, the kind that made the world seem freshly washed but not yet dry. The scent of damp cedar drifted through the open window. On the wall above my desk hung a single frame, matte black, plain, nothing ornate. Inside, it was a still image from the wedding recording Marin, stepping forward down the aisle. Eyes lifted, veil caught mid-air by the wind. The moment before everything fell apart. I had paused the footage there one evening and captured the frame. It wasn't about nostalgia or forgiveness. It was about truth. The picture held a strange calm, my daughter in motion, unaware of what waited beyond that second. I looked at it now and saw not tragedy, but proof of survival. Beneath the photograph, a small brass plate gleamed in the afternoon light. The words engraved on it read, "Truth arrives, even through frozen screens." Tom's handwriting had once adorned every label in this house, and I'd chosen a font that felt close to his, neat, steady, patient. I lit the candle on the windowsill, the same one that had burned beside the laptop the day everything broke open. Its flame steadied, gold against the gray. Beside it sat my teacup, half full, still warm. Marin would be arriving soon for dinner. She had a new project to show me photographs taken by her students, little fragments of color and chaos. She'd written to me earlier, a short message they're learning to see, not just look. I smiled at that. Outside, the rain thickened, tapping softly against the glass, a sound I'd come to love for its constancy. I watched the reflection of the candle shimmer in the framed photograph, one still image meeting another. I never said a word. I whispered into the quiet room. I didn't have to. The clock ticked once, then again, ordinary. steady, alive.